blindness from parasite to public health. So please help me welcome Abby.
Like you said, I'm Abby Kopecki. I'm a biology major and I have a minor in public and global health as well as chemistry. And today I'm going to be talking about the many cases of river blindness from parasite to public health. And then you might be wondering, why should I care about this presentation? An estimated 25 million people worldwide are infected with river blindness, and another 90 million are at risk for infection. With all these people infected, we have the resources to eliminate this disease, so why are we letting over 25 million people suffer with this disease? This disease also creates a poverty cycle that is hard to interrupt unless this disease is eliminated due to the breadwinners of the family, usually being the ones that are infected, creating their families to go into poverty, which also decreases the life expectancy of these families. So again, why are we letting people suffer if we have the sources to eliminate this disease? You might be wondering, what is onchocerciasis? Onchocerciasis is also known as river blindness and is an infectious disease caused by the parasite Onchocerca volvus, and it is a parasitic worm. It is carried by black flies and transferred to humans via the fly bites, and it has a wide range of symptoms and manifestations that occur. The manifestations, over 90% of patients will experience some sort of manifestation. This can be fever, joint pain, weight loss, and even musculoskeletal pain, but it also ranges from dermatological as well as ocular manifestations. The first we're going to go into is dermal manifestations. The dermal manifestations are the most common source of symptoms that patients will see, and this is due to baby worms migrating throughout the subcutaneous tissue, and then their death is what actually triggers an immune response, which causes these symptoms. In this first picture on the left, we can see the nodules. Nodules are where the adult worms actually reside in the body, and this can be on any bony promiscuous, such as elbows, knees, collarbones, and even the scalp. And then the next picture is leopard skin or altered pigmentation. This is due to that immune response from the body. And then that last one is just a palpebral rash due to the migration of the worms, as well as fly bites and itching of the skin. And the next is an ocular manifestation. These manifestations are relatively rare compared to the dermatological, but they still affect 1.15 million people in this disease. And this progression is usually due to the microvilli getting into the eyes and then the immune response there. And this creates vision impairment as well as blindness. In that top picture, we can see where the microvilli got into the eye, and then the immune system actually attacked the cornea, or the clear part of your eye. It created opacities in the eye, so you cannot see through the clear anymore, and it's cloudy, causing visual impairment. And once these opacities are there, it is very hard to get rid of them, if not impossible. So the person is left blind for the rest of their life. And then at the bottom one, this little lesion right here was caused by the disease. It is not known if it was caused by the death of the microvilli or the baby worms itself, or an autoimmune reaction between the antigens of the parasitic worm and our photoreceptors in the back of the eye. But this lesion will affect the optic nerve, which is located at the bottom here. And if the optic nerve is damaged, that is how our brain gets the signals from our eye. So therefore, you would go blind in that way as well. There's also been a pattern of epileptic events being seen. This is a relatively new pattern that researchers are noticing, but they have seen that in communities with high onchocerciasis, epilepsy is also correlated with that disease, and then as onchocerciasis decreases, epilepsy also decreases. But they have seen, since it's new, they're only theorizing how it is affecting the central nervous system, but they believe that the baby worms are entering the coracoid plexus of the brain and crossing the blood-brain barrier, which then damages the brain. The immune system then clears the infection, but the damage is still there, resulting in the seizures. The seizures can range in frequency and severity, but most seizures they see are nodding seizures, and it is seen in children many times. And if the seizures in children, many times they're excluded from classrooms because they do not know why they're having seizures. And then the risk factor includes childhood infection. They are seeing this more in children who get onchocerciasis than adults who get onchocerciasis. And now we're going to go into how it is actually transmitted via black flies to humans. Black flies are the vector of this disease, so they actually carry it and transmit it to humans. It is specifically the female black flies responsible for transmission of the parasite to humans as they take blood meals. And then breeding sites of black flies are along fast-flowing rivers on the vegetation there, and that is, they can fly up to 15 kilometers from these breeding sites to the communities that are infected. So the actual transmission cycle, it starts up in that left corner up there, an infected blue black fly, and has larvae in it, and when it bites, it drops larvae into the human. This larvae then grows into adult worms, which can be found in those nodules that we saw earlier. Once in the nodules, the adult worms will reproduce and cause microfilaria, or the baby worms that I've been saying. And these microfilaria actually are the ones that leave the nodules and go through the subcutaneous tissue to around the body, and even the eyes to produce those manifestations that we saw earlier. But once another black fly then bites you, it gets the microfilaria, or the baby worms, in its system, and the microfilaria turn into larvae again, and the larvae then gets deposited into the human. Thus, the cycle keeps going on and on, even. So, to disrupt the cycle, we must disrupt either the vectors, the black flies, or the human manifestations. In some ways that are being how you diagnose onchocerciasis, the common way is skin snips, so you take a little piece of skin and then place it under a microscope and count how many baby worms there are in your system. This is the most reliable method, but it is unreliable if it is early in infection or the microvilli count is very low, just due to it being hard to count how many worms there are in your system. But they're also developing rapid format antibody test cards, which then you would be able to use urine and or tears, and it would test to see if there's any parasitic proteins in your system. But the only problem with this is it cannot distinguish past versus current infections. And then slit lamp examinations, which we can see in that picture. He has a handheld slit lamp, and this is just simply a lens and lights to look into the backs of your eyes to see if there's any microvilli or damage that has occurred from this disease. This disease is located in 31 sub-Saharan African countries, the Arabian Peninsula, as well as Latin and South America. The main fraction of people, over 99% of people infected with this disease, are located in Africa, mostly in Ethiopia and Cameroon, but they are in many other countries. And then it was found in South and Latin America, but it was eliminated in Mexico, Cuba, Guatemala, as well as Mexico, Guatemala, Cuba, and Guatemala. I can't remember the fourth one, sorry. But there has been 4 countries that have been eliminated. And then Brazil and Venezuela are still currently having infection rates there, but only in small localities. And then back to elimination strategies. So once again, why are we letting people suffer if we have the elimination strategies available to us? In 1995, they started undergoing treatment strategies, but all data before 2002 was deemed unreliable due to civil conflicts as well as unreliable data collection. But in 2005, efforts dramatically increased in improvements of elimination strategies. Current elimination strategies right now are mass drug administration, which we'll go into in a little bit, nodulectomies, which is the surgical removal of those nodules we have seen. It is mostly done in Latin America due to the presence of the nodules being more on the scalp that we saw. And they thought that due to it being on the scalp, ocular manifestations would be more common. This was not proven, but they still do it more in Latin America due to them being on the scalp. And then larvicide, which is just the pesticide use of killing black flies, and then slash and clear methods, which we'll talk about later, but it controls the black fly vectors as well. To go into what main drug is being used to fight onchocerciasis, it is ivermectin. Ivermectin is widely used in agricultural and veterinary fields. And then how the drug works, it keeps open the postsynaptic chloride channels, thus not letting another signal get to the next cell. So it ultimately paralyzes the worms. It does kill the baby worms, but not the adult worms. Thus, treatment must go on the entirety of the adult worm's life, which is 10 to 15 years. And in some communities, it is not seen that it ultimately ends the parasite's life cycle, or ends transmission in that community, but it is likely that it would if used correctly. And then on how they distribute ivermectin, they do it through mass drug administration. Mass drug administration is the mass drug spread of the thing, but it is if you have it or if you don't have the disease, you will still be getting ivermectin. And this was piloted in 2007 and is still going on today. And for it to be successful, over 80% of the eligible population must be taking the drug of choice, which is ivermectin, for it to be useful or successful. And in some cases, mass drug administration has dropped microvilli presence to below 5%, which ultimately stops transmission in those communities. And then current guidelines set by the World Health Organization is annual or biannual treatments for ivermectin. And then slash and clear methods. Slash and clear methods eliminates vegetation along breeding sites for the black flies. So on that picture on the left, we see the vegetation, and then after slash and clear, there would be no more vegetation in that riverbank. So the black flies no longer have a breeding site to produce more of the vector. This has to be repeated though every 2 to 3 months for it to be successful. But biting averages decreased up to 74% when there was a 1 kilometer clear. And then when it was a 2 kilometer clear, biting averages decreased up to 94% in that community. So finally, some challenges that are being faced with onchocerciasis elimination. The World Health Organization actually had a goal of 2025 elimination, but has bumped it up to 2030. This is due to many challenges that need to be overcome, but the 3 that I'm going to hit on are the COVID-19 interruption, socioeconomic issues, as well as ivermectin resistance. First, we're going to go into the COVID-19 interruption. COVID-19 interruption obviously disrupted public health around the world, but this also disrupted the use of ivermectin in those communities. They could not get it, or they didn't have officials or people to go and bring it to those communities. So this delay in treatment, they do not know the short-term and long-term consequences yet in those communities, but computer models are trying to predict what they will be. They've seen that in the computer models, communities with shorter MVA are going to have a higher resurgence than communities with long-term mass drug administration. But to help mitigate this gap, they say to up the amount of mass drug administrations in a year, so instead of doing annual, go to biannual, and this will also hopefully help them catch up the gap so it will be eliminated by 2030. And then some socioeconomic issues. There's a lot of misknowledge about this disease in the communities that it affects. A Nigerian study found that 27% of respondents had no idea how the disease was spread, and another 23% thought that it was due to witchcraft. So they do not know what this disease is or how it's occurring. And then a majority of the same respondents didn't even know there was a treatment method available for them if they had onchocerciasis. So spreading knowledge in these communities is a major must if we want to eliminate it, just so they know it can be treated and also so they go and get treated. But then onchocerciasis rarely leads to death, but it also causes a high burden on the individuals as well as their families. Like I said earlier, it usually is the breadwinner that is in the field, so they're the ones that are getting bitten by black flies. So they can no longer, or they become less productive at their job once infected. They found that people that are infected are 15% less productive at work than people that are not infected. And also, they might go blind, so that's not really a great thing either. But they also found that if they do go blind, the mortality of the blind in those communities is 4 times higher than the non-blind. And then finally, ivermectin resistance. In some communities, there's been 19 annual doses of ivermectin, as well as over 400 million doses of ivermectin distributed by mass drug administration. Ivermectin is supposed to drop microfilarial counts dramatically, but after ivermectin has been prescribed or treated, they have seen microfilarial counts still at high levels. They're suggesting that some of the parasites are becoming resistant to ivermectin, so it's no longer working in some communities. And to combat this issue, they are trying to discover other drugs that would be useful in mass drug administration. One of the drugs is moxidectin, which would work similarly to ivermectin, where it kills the baby worms but not the adult worms. But they have found that moxidectin actually lasts longer than ivermectin, and a computer model suggested that annual moxidectin would work very similarly to biannual ivermectin. And another drug was doxycycline, which actually kills the adult worm, but not the baby worms. And I didn't go into too much more detail with that one. but there is other drugs being discovered right now. So just to kind of wrap it up, again, why should we let people suffer if this disease is eliminatable? And the ways that we need to overcome this challenge is finding a new drug. Ivermectin has been seen to be becoming more resistant, but also there's probably better drugs to kill the adult worms and the baby worms at the same time, or find a way to have them work in combination. And then finally, just spread awareness of this disease in those communities so people know what it is. And then I would like to thank Dr. Remington for being my advisor through this last year and helping me with my presentation. And then the Wayne State Biology Department for my education over the past 4 years, and then the Honors Program for helping me with this presentation as well as giving me a platform to share my information. Thank you.